Over the centuries, people have learned to utilize the Earth's resources to live longer, healthier, more productive lives. Sounds great, right? But for all the benefits, there is an increasing concern that we may be destroying our planet in the process. Many people believe the environmental challenges facing the world today are greater than at any time in human history. As the world's population continues to expand, how can we manage the Earth's limited resources to ensure both continued growth and a healthy planet? In the last 50 years, the world's population has nearly tripled to over 6 billion people. Much of the future population growth will be in urban areas of developing countries, leading to major environmental concerns such as air and water pollution. Also, as many people in developing countries around the world are trying to adopt the same lifestyle enjoyed by those in developed nations, many wonder whether there are enough natural resources left to go around. After all, centuries of human activity have already had an impact on the Earth. For most of our history, we've made choices with an eye to short-term gains. It's only recently that we've begun to focus on sustainable development. So how do we strike a balance between getting what we want from the Earth's resources while at the same time conserving them for the long term?
At some point, there has to be a point where human activity sort of either slows down or is directed in a way that has a lighter footprint on Earth. And most of the problems that humans will be facing in the 21st century on the environmental side come from just having too big a footprint. We're like a big gorilla stomping down across the face of the Earth.
The impact of human activity is certainly not always a bad thing. But it's important to realize that for every silver lining, there's a cloud. Pesticides and fertilizers can help grow more food to feed the growing world population, but they can also poison the soil and water. So how do we feed the hungry without poisoning the Earth? What about fossil fuels such as oil and natural gas? They provide us with a valuable source of heat and energy, but contribute to pollution. And some estimates suggest we'll start running out of them in our lifetimes. Since people first appeared on this planet, there have been tensions between human health and the health of the environment. More than 2,000 years ago, the Romans developed ways to make everyday life better, from building aqueducts to carry clean water from rivers and lakes to cities, to simply burying garbage in a dump instead of dumping it into the street. Still, these improvements did have unintended negative consequences. As it became more desirable to live in towns and cities where people were in closer contact than ever before, it also became much easier for diseases to spread. It was just these conditions that helped the bubonic plague sweep across Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries, killing millions. The Industrial Revolution, which began in England in the 18th century, transformed people's lives, providing new methods of creating goods on a mass scale. But at what cost to the environment? Progress was fueled by coal, which choked the air in many urban centers with thick, foul-smelling smog, and simply breathing became hazardous to one's health. Industrialization had a dramatic impact on the worldwide environment as well, as European countries exploited the natural resources of their colonies in Asia, Africa, and South America. This exploitation only widened the gap between countries which had industrialized and those which had not. That gap still exists today, even as developing countries try to rapidly modernize to catch up to the developed world. This rush to share the economic benefits of industrialization is a source of many of today's global environmental issues. Developed countries are those that went through industrialization in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and today possess much of the world's wealth. Developing nations are those that are in various stages of modernization and industrialization, ranging from the desperately poor to rapidly growing nations. So, who uses more natural resources and contributes more to global environmental problems, developed or developing nations? The facts are astonishing. The wealthiest developed nations make up about 20% of the world's population, but they use about 70% of its resources. They also cause much of the world's pollution. But developing nations cause pollution as well.
I have been in Mexico City where if I held my hand to here, it would be hazy. There's famous stories of Mexico City children, when they draw the sky, they draw it gray. There are stories of waking up one morning and half the birds are dead.
Economic development holds out the promise that all nations can offer their citizens enough food, suitable living conditions, and good medical care. But experience shows that as wealth grows, so do people's desires to have the material possessions of the developed world: refrigerators, ovens, computers, and cars. Corporate profits grow as companies cater to those desires. Economies expand. More jobs are created. But what's good for people can strain the environment. For example, what would happen if every country in the world consumed at the rate of the world's largest economy, the United States?
Probably the best way I can illustrate that is to think about cars. There's a little less than one car for every person, man, woman, or child in the United States. In China, there's about one car for every 100 people. Now, what's going to happen if the Chinese develop the same driving habits that the United States does, based on the same kinds of cars with the same air pollution or the same carbon dioxide emissions? It'll add massively to air pollution and public health problems.
So how can we balance the growth demands of the developing world with increased strains on the environment? In recent years, international agreements have tried to balance both worldwide environmental concerns with the continued demands and needs of developing nations.
This generation, I think, understands better that it is genuinely a collective trust, and that we all have to think about what sacrifices we can make to make it possible for all countries to develop, to sustain their people, but to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the environment for future generations.
That's quite a challenge, considering how large a footprint humans leave on the environment. There isn't a single human activity that does not affect the world we live in, from growing food to producing goods and services. Aided by the use of fertilizers and pesticides, world food production has approximately doubled since 1950. Success in agriculture, however, has put strains on the environment. For example, cultivating more land for crops means cutting down forests, draining wetlands, and irrigating deserts with scarce water supplies. Each new acre of farmland promises help to support a growing population, but at the same time has sometimes led to devastating long-term consequences. In Central Asia, for instance, the government of the former Soviet Union diverted the rivers that fed the Aral Sea, once the world's fourth largest lake, into irrigation channels for farms to grow cotton and rice, two crops notorious for their huge demand for water. As a result, between 1965 and 1990, almost half the sea dried up, leaving lifeless salt flats. Dust storms whipped up cotton pesticides that had trickled to the sea floor, spreading disease. Poor agricultural planning turned the lake into a desert. Recent successes in agriculture, along with improved medicine and sanitation, have permitted the world's population to soar. Scientists estimate that by the year 2025, current food production might have to double in order to keep up. Can we do that without increased use of harmful pesticides? Some say this might all be possible with new technologies, but the truth is, we simply don't know yet. Food supplies aren't the only pressing issue when it comes to agriculture. For millions of people around the world, a clean and abundant water supply is a critical issue. Millions of Indians already live in close quarters around the sacred Ganges River. The river is used for drinking water, bathing, agriculture, tanneries, and factories. That kind of use has taxed the river so severely that it has become little more than an open sewer. In 2002, levels of toxic bacteria associated with human and animal waste measured high above the level considered safe for humans. With fresh water in such limited supply, how can we balance all the demands for water with the need to keep it clean? Just as finding a balance between the human need for food and water and preserving the environment is critical for future generations, there's also a need to address the size of the footprint industry leaves on the environment. Factories create jobs and turn raw materials into cars, coats, and computers. Mines and energy plants produce energy to light the night and heat the winter. But where do the byproducts of manufacturing go? Factories in Cleveland dumped so many chemicals into the Cuyahoga River that in 1969, the river, slick with oil and other pollutants, caught fire. That shocked the nation and led to bans against chemicals like PCBs, an oily yellow substance that scientists have linked to cancer. Even after the ban, though, PCBs dumped into rivers clung to mud in the bottom. Clean water laws that have been strictly enforced have helped companies realize that spending money on good environmental practice is worth it.
It's worth it because it usually makes their operations more efficient, usually makes their workers safer and happier, usually saves them some money because it prevents some kind of waste that they have to deal with.
Even though industry has worked to reduce pollution, just using fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas to power industrial activity, as well as to run automobiles, leaves waste gases like methane, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide in the atmosphere. These ingredients mix with sunlight to form smog. In several cities around the world, a thick brown haze of smog often blankets them, blocking the sun. During smog alert days, weather reports warn people to stay indoors. Many of China's cities have serious air pollution problems. Some people wear surgical masks to go outside in the yellowish acid fog and coal smoke. The costs of industrialization are visible in the country's rivers as well, more than half of which are contaminated by industrial, farm, and household waste. Developing countries contribute their share of greenhouse gases and other air pollution to the atmosphere. For instance, 1/3 of all energy consumption in developing countries comes from burning the cheapest fuel sources: wood, crop residue, and dung. Automobiles are a major source of air pollution in the world. And as incomes increase worldwide, so does car use. The number of cars worldwide is expected to double by the year 2020. Because the U.S. has so many cars now, it is the world's largest air polluter.
All of the energy efficiency gains we've made are all going into driving bigger cars, driving more cars, having bigger houses with air conditioning, where we set temperatures in houses that are either too cold in summer or too warm in winter. It's made no difference, and we're still the primary consumer of fossil fuels in the world.
One possible alternative to smog-producing fossil fuels would seem to lie in clean-burning nuclear energy. But nuclear power comes saddled with its own set of problems. In 1986, a runaway reaction at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Russia left much of the region around the plant uninhabitable and either destroyed or damaged crops, not only in Russia, but also in surrounding countries. Even when nuclear plants run smoothly, disposing nuclear waste is a problem. Nuclear waste remains dangerous to all living things for many years, sometimes for centuries. Where can nuclear waste go? In sealed containers? In underground storage caves, never to be touched again? The best scientists can offer is an educated guess that such methods will prevent radioactive contamination of the soil and water. So, what are the environmental consequences of failing to find an alternative to fossil fuels? How are we to balance the need for such fuels against their impact on the environment? And in a country like China, what's more important, economic growth or protecting the environment? It's a question many Chinese wrestle with as they put up with the smog and overcrowding in cities in order to extend their 20-year economic boom. The Chinese government has sought to improve the air and water quality without sacrificing rapid industrial progress. But in other regions of the world that lag far behind China, people have many fewer choices. How can anyone worry about resource conservation when it's a daily struggle just to survive? Nowhere is the richness of the Earth's natural resources more apparent, nor the costs of misusing them more far-reaching than in the vast Amazon rainforest in South America. Its lush foliage shelters as much as half of all life on the planet. Millions of species of plants, animals, insects, and birds, almost half still unnamed. But in Brazil, where the population has tripled in the second half of the 20th century, land is in short supply, forcing many to turn to the Amazon rainforest, which covers 40% of the country. Other causes of disappearing rainforest include commercial logging, cattle ranching, and the never-ending search for fuel. But the loss of trees poses a danger to the forest's most valuable resource, pure oxygen. All trees convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, but here, the vast tree canopy does it on such a large scale that the Amazon has been called the lungs of the planet. Losing these trees could mean dramatic increases in carbon dioxide, one of the primary greenhouse gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. Such a loss would have major consequences not only in Brazil, but worldwide. Worldwide concern about the consequences of rainforest destruction led Brazil to join international agencies in the 1990s to begin to regulate development of the rainforest. Since then, the rate of destruction has slowed, a reminder that conservation efforts can slow dangerous trends. Still, much work needs to be done to preserve this invaluable resource. Perhaps the clearest reminder that we all share the fate of the Earth involves the climate. Over the past 100 years, the average temperature has risen dramatically. The leading explanation for this increase is the gases poured into the atmosphere by human activity, gases that create a greenhouse effect by trapping the sun's heat. This phenomenon has become known as global warming.
It's an earth-shaking change. It's the kind of change that will remake the face of the Earth. Record heat, but less cold, less extreme cold. Record drought in some places, particularly food-growing areas in some of the poorer countries of the world that already have malnutrition problems.
The short-term effects of global warming are already being felt. Computer models project that a warmer planet will have more violent storms, more frequent droughts and floods, and expanding deserts, the very changes we've seen since the 1990s. Each year, global warming kills about 160,000 people from heat-related malnutrition and mosquito-borne malaria. While few dispute that the Earth is warming, many still wonder whether human activity is solely to blame, or whether the consequences will be so dire. They point out that the Earth is emerging from the last ice age, so that a general warming trend is to be expected. In fact, there are some who argue that by disrupting ocean currents, global warming could even trigger the next ice age. The arguments back and forth reflect just how difficult it is to make long-term predictions based on short-term data, especially about something as complicated as climate change. Predicting the future, not an easy task, but one the experts, scientists, and politicians alike are charged with. How they see the world tomorrow is likely to determine the actions they take today. And those actions will certainly have an enormous impact on the environment that you, your children, and your children's children will have to live in. So the big question remains, where do we go from here? Some of the most important projections about the future health of the planet are those involving world population. How many people will be living on this planet in 20, 50, 100 years? And even more importantly, how many people can live on the Earth before the challenge of providing food, water, and a reasonable standard of living simply becomes too much? Projections vary widely, but even low estimates forecast that there will be roughly another 1.5 billion people in the world in the next 50 years. That's adding more than 6 times the current population of the United States. And remember, that's the low-end estimate. It's possible that the world's population could double in that time, adding 6 billion more people. Almost all of that projected population growth will take place in the world's poorest countries. And since those countries are already struggling to provide food, clothing, good sanitation, and a place to live for everyone, the pressure to overuse and misuse natural resources will only grow. As much as the sheer number of people will put a burden on the world's environment, there's also the issue of who makes up that population. Historically, the age of any given population has been something of a pyramid, with many more young people than elderly. But as some countries encourage people to have fewer children and advancements in medicine and healthcare allow people to live longer, that has begun to change. Some experts warn there's a new problem on the horizon.
In some developing countries like Thailand, the discussion is no longer about overpopulation, but it's about what are we going to do if we have a population structure that has a lot of old people and very few young people, because the Thais have been very successful with their family planning program and have reduced fertility growth from an average of 6 people per woman in 1970 to less than 2 in 2000.
Over the past few decades, there has been some progress regarding other areas of environmental concerns. In 1987, governments from around the world met in Canada and signed the Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer, which gradually phased out the use of CFCs. By limiting new damage to the ozone layer, the treaty proved that governments could respond with effective environmental action when danger arose. But coming to agreement on global regulations to preserve the environment has been a difficult task, mostly because different countries have different needs. What one nation sees as a benefit, another may take as a crushing blow to its economy. In 1997, the United Nations sponsored the environmental conference that led to the Kyoto Protocol. That landmark treaty set hard deadlines for reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. Most of the world's nations signed. But some, including the U.S., balked at ratifying the treaty, arguing that it places an unequal burden on them to cut back on emissions while developing countries face no restrictions. Developing countries see it differently, pointing out that developed countries had no emissions limits when they were modernizing. So it all comes back to balance. Can we develop new methods to provide food, water, and energy for a growing world population? And if so, will those methods protect or destroy the environment in which we all live? The balance between what the world needs And protecting the very resources that are used to meet those needs is a delicate one. Maintaining that balance will be a challenge not only for our generation, but for many more generations to come.